I hadn't meant to notice her. Not really. But the way she moved through the room made everything else fade. Her heels clicked softly against the wooden floor, a deliberate rhythm that felt like it was syncing with my own heartbeat. She was in her mid-40s, I guessed, but the way she carried herself made it impossible to measure her by age. There was a grace in her posture, a quiet confidence that filled the air around her. And yet, beneath it, something fragile lingered, like a note barely held in tune. I was 24, mostly invisible to people like her. I kept my head down, worked quietly, tried not to attract attention. But she had noticed me anyway. That first glance across the room wasn't casual. It lingered, long enough to make me aware of every detail. The curve of her neck, the slight crease in her sleeve, the faint scent of her perfume, warm and subtle, like vanilla softened by sunlight. She came closer, and I felt the tension in the air thicken, a magnetic pull that made my chest ache with something I didn't have a name for. She stopped near the counter, pretending to look for something in her bag, but her eyes found mine again, and that quiet intensity made me forget how to breathe. Her hand brushed mine, just the lightest touch, but enough to send a jolt straight through me. My fingers trembled, barely noticeable, but I knew she felt it too. "You're quiet," she said, her voice low, with a softness that made my ears burn. She smiled just enough to suggest mischief, but not fully, like she was testing boundaries I wasn't supposed to cross. I guess. I managed to say, my own voice too small, too fast. I cleared my throat and looked away, but she tilted her head, keeping me in her gaze. There was no judgment, only curiosity, the kind that disarms before it confronts. The room around us seemed to shrink, leaving only her warmth and the subtle brush of her shoulder as she shifted slightly closer. I could feel it, heat radiating off her, the faint brush of her perfume rising in the space between us, the almost imperceptible pressure of proximity that made my stomach twist. Every small movement, every breath, seemed amplified. "I didn't mean to startle you," she said, her hand lightly brushing my forearm again as if by accident. But the glance she gave me betrayed her words. It was loaded, heavy with something unspoken. I wanted to speak, to say something clever, but my mouth refused. My pulse thudded in my ears. She leaned just slightly forward, closer than anyone should, and I caught the faint scent of her hair, warm, familiar, inviting. The air between us felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something neither of us dared to say aloud. And then, just as the tension reached a point I thought I might collapse under, the door opened behind her with a sharp click. She froze. I froze. That moment, so delicate, so fragile, hung in the air for a heartbeat longer before reality intruded. She glanced over her shoulder, then back at me, and her lips curved into a smile that made my chest tighten. I wanted to ask her name. I wanted to ask for more. But all I could do was stand there, feeling the echo of her touch still burning on my skin. And I knew, somehow, that nothing in my life would ever feel this charged, this quiet, again. "Cliffhanger." She turned back toward me, eyes glinting, and whispered something I didn't catch, but the way she said it made me certain it wasn't meant to be ignored. I couldn't stop thinking about her, not for a moment. Even when I tried to focus on the mundane tasks around me, her presence lingered like the aftertaste of strong coffee. Her name, Elena, rolled through my mind with a weight I didn't understand yet. She had asked me to help with something small, a spreadsheet she couldn't figure out, but when she leaned over my shoulder, I felt the subtle heat of her body press closer than necessary. Her hair brushed my arm. Her breath came faintly against my ear as she explained, and my pulse betrayed me in ways I couldn't hide. I kept my eyes on the screen, pretending the numbers mattered more than her nearness. She noticed, of course. She always noticed. I could see it in the way her gaze softened whenever I stumbled over a word or hesitated while typing. There was an unspoken curiosity there, almost tender, but edged with restraint, as if she knew the lines we weren't supposed to cross. Elena wasn't a woman to give herself freely. That much was clear from the quiet traces of sadness I sometimes caught in her eyes, the way she laughed just a little too carefully, or hesitated before touching anyone, even me. I wondered what she had lost, what she had promised herself never to risk again. Her life had a rhythm of restraint, of unspoken grief. And yet, something about me, my youth, my honesty, my quiet attention, seemed to unravel the careful boundaries she had built. I too had walls. Being young, people often dismissed me, thought me naive or reckless. But with her, I couldn't hide behind those defenses. Every glance she cast my way felt like she saw through my pretense, through the casual jokes I used to shield myself from being truly seen. And I wanted her to see me, more than anyone else had ever bothered. "It's clearer now," I said, my voice betraying more relief than the spreadsheet deserved. She smiled, that slow, knowing smile that made my chest ache. And then she lingered closer, her shoulder brushing mine, her breath warm as she murmured, "You've been paying attention. Not like most people do." There it was again, the way she made me feel seen and simultaneously warn me away. The tension was addictive, almost unbearable. Neither of us moved to break it, though every instinct told us we should. When she finally pulled back, there was no rush, no abruptness, just a quiet pause, as if the room itself was holding its breath with us. I caught her eyes for one long moment, and in that pause, I understood. This wasn't about the spreadsheet or the tasks or anything practical. It was about us, about the silent pull neither of us wanted to name, yet both of us felt. And somehow, in that stillness, the world shrank until it was only Elena and me, the space between us charged, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. The office was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears until every small sound becomes amplified. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but I wasn't really typing. I was watching her, Elena, bend slightly over the desk, hair falling just enough to brush my shoulder when she shifted. The warmth of her presence felt like it was seeping into my skin, uninvited, and yet I couldn't move away. "You missed a step here," she murmured, voice low, close enough that I felt her breath on my cheek. My chest tightened at the nearness. The words were about spreadsheets, but the weight behind them, it wasn't about numbers anymore. I was about to respond when the door handle rattled. My stomach dropped, and she straightened instantly. I turned slightly, half expecting a colleague to walk in, and caught her hand retreating from my arm. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible motion, but it set my heart hammering. "No one's here," she whispered, but there was a tremor in her tone. Our eyes met, and for a fraction of a second, the world shrank until it was just us. No office, no rules, no one else's judgment. I wanted to say something, anything, to bridge that invisible line, but my mouth betrayed me with a nervous cough. She smiled faintly, one corner of her lips lifting in acknowledgement of the tension between us. It was almost cruel how easily she could make me feel like I was both safe and in danger at the same time. She leaned back, but not fully. Her shoulder brushed mine again, a light contact that made my whole body aware of every inch of her. I caught myself imagining what it would be like if she leaned closer still, if our lips met even for a second. And then guilt hit like ice. I couldn't. We shouldn't. The age gap, the implied boundaries, the world that would judge. Every rational thought screamed at me to pull back. But my eyes betrayed me. They followed her every movement, lingering longer than decorum allowed. She noticed. She leaned in just enough that her hair fell across my arm, her elbow brushing mine. A soft, teasing pressure. A whisper of warmth. I started, but the words died on my tongue. What could I possibly say? "I want this." Too blunt. "We shouldn't." Too obvious. She let the silence speak instead. Her eyes held mine, deep, unflinching, and I realized she felt the same turmoil. Desire, hesitation, fear, all wrapped up in one fragile heartbeat. Then my phone buzzed sharply on the desk. A message. I ignored it, but the interruption felt deliberate, cruel, like the universe itself refused to let us have this moment in peace. I looked back at her, and she exhaled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face in a motion that seemed innocent, yet deliberate. We stayed like that, close enough to feel each other's heat, far enough to pretend restraint, but the distance between us had thinned dangerously. My hand twitched, almost reaching for hers. Hers lingered near me, a gentle, unspoken invitation. And when she leaned just slightly closer than before, I couldn't resist the pull. Our shoulders pressed together, a small contact that set my nerves ablaze. We were closer than ever, aware of everything we shouldn't be, and yet neither of us moved away. The silence held us, taut and electric. as though the next breath might break the fragile line between restraint and surrender. The office lights were dimmer than usual, the late hours stretching shadows across the room. My chest felt tight, like it couldn't contain the restlessness simmering inside me. She was near, Elena, leaning against the edge of the desk with a subtle grace that made everything else fade. I wanted to tell her to move, to step back, to preserve some sense of propriety, but I couldn't. My body betrayed me, drawn to her like a magnet. She turned toward me slowly, and for a heartbeat, everything froze. Her eyes held mine with a quiet intensity that made it impossible to think. I noticed the slight tremor in her hand as she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. A motion so delicate it felt intimate, deliberate. The air between us thickened, and I realized I could feel the heat radiating off her, almost tasting it in the space between our faces. "I can't stop thinking about you," I admitted before I could catch myself. The words were out, raw and unpolished, trembling in my throat. My hand itched to reach for her, to brush the hair from her cheek, to feel the brush of her shoulder against mine again. She blinked, a flicker of surprise crossing her features, and then her lips curved in a slow, knowing smile. "You shouldn't," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, low and warm, sending a shiver down my spine. The forbidden nature of it all made my pulse spike. Desire, fear, everything tangled inside me, and I realized she felt it too. She stepped closer, just enough that our arms brushed lightly, intentionally, or maybe not. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to act, to lean in, to close the gap that had been building for weeks. Her hand lifted, hesitated near my chest, then dropped, and the motion was enough to make my entire body ache. I swallowed, trying to force control back into my voice. "Elena," I started, but the word felt weak, hollow against the storm building between us. She tilted her head, her eyes never leaving mine. The silence stretched, electric and suffocating, as if the room itself was holding its breath with us. I wanted to close the distance, wanted to feel her fully, but the weight of what we were doing, what we might be about to do, made me hesitate. I whispered again, closer this time, letting my lips almost brush the shell of her ear. My voice was low, trembling, a dangerous intimacy carried in a single syllable. Her breath hitched. She leaned just slightly against me, the warmth of her body pressing into mine, and I felt the world tilt. Everything outside the office disappeared. The late hour, the shadows, the responsibilities that should have kept us apart. We were standing on the edge of something inevitable, something neither of us could undo once it began. My hand twitched toward her hair, hers lingered near me, and the air between us seemed alive with anticipation. And then she spoke, a single, bold line. Her lips so close I could feel the warmth of her breath. "If you wanted me, you'd already be doing it." Time froze. My heart hammered. The space between us felt impossibly small, our lips inches apart, every second stretched taut. And then, the door creaked open behind her. I thought the office door opening was just a passing distraction. I thought it was an interruption we could ignore, that the tension between us could survive a creak in the hinges. But it wasn't. Someone had seen, or at least heard enough, to change the rhythm between us. A note slipped onto my desk, small and folded. I recognized Elena's handwriting immediately. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it. "We can't. Not yet. Someone knows." I looked up at her, and she stood near the doorway, back rigid, lips pressed into a thin line that didn't quite hide the panic in her eyes. She had expected me to read it, expected the message to land like a jolt, and it did. Every nerve in my body was on fire, not just from desire anymore, but from a raw, reckless fear. She stepped closer, and I felt the warmth of her shoulder brush mine. It should have comforted me, but instead it set every instinct on edge. Her eyes flicked to mine, pleading, warning, daring, all at once. I wanted to reach for her, to steady her trembling hand, but the note between us was a wall we hadn't crossed yet. "Someone overheard," she admitted, voice low, almost breaking. Her breath brushed my cheek as she leaned in slightly to whisper, and my pulse jumped. I didn't think they'd notice. I swallowed, heart hammering. "Notice what?" I asked, though I already knew. Every subtle brush of skin, every lingering glance, every pause that held us in suspended tension. It had been visible. Dangerous. Her hand hovered near mine, then retreated, trembling. I felt my own fingers itch toward her, needing contact, needing the grounding of her skin against mine. And in that small motion, the risk became thrilling. We could be caught, judged, ruined, but I didn't want to step back. She bit her lower lip, a micro-behavior I couldn't ignore, and leaned just slightly closer, shoulder brushing mine again. The proximity was unbearable. It made me aware of her scent, the warmth of her breath, the heat radiating off her body. Every instinct screamed both to flee and to stay. "I don't want to stop," she admitted finally, her voice almost breaking, low and intimate. The words weren't loud, but they vibrated through me. My chest tightened, and I caught her gaze, raw and unguarded, the wall she always kept up finally faltering. I stepped just slightly closer, careful, testing the line between restraint and surrender. Her hand twitched toward mine again, a hesitant reach that spoke more than words ever could. Our eyes held, both of us aware that every heartbeat carried weight. The world outside, the judgment, the risk, the consequences, suddenly felt smaller than the pull between us. And though the note was a warning, a reminder of caution, it only heightened the desire simmering in the room. "I don't know if we can," I started, voice low, unsure. She leaned in, almost brushing my lips with hers, her eyes locked onto mine. "We have to decide. Now." And in that instant, I realized there was no turning back. The office was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning, a low drone that seemed almost intentional, keeping time with the rapid thump of my heart. She stood near me, Elena, so close that I could feel the warmth of her body, the faint rise and fall of her chest. Every nerve in me screamed to close the gap, yet the weight of consequence pressed against my mind, demanding caution. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered, voice low and unsteady, though her eyes betrayed a desire she couldn't hide. She lifted a hand, just hovering near my shoulder, a hesitant gesture that made me ache to grasp it. "It's dangerous." I swallowed hard. "I know," I admitted, voice equally low. "But I can't walk away. Not now. Not after." I stopped, because there were no words that could capture the pull I felt. The way her nearness made every other thought meaningless. Her breath brushed my cheek as she leaned closer, just slightly, teasing the line between restraint and surrender. I could feel it. Tiny, electric touches, the brush of her hair against my arm, the warmth radiating from her shoulder, the faint scent of her perfume curling in the space between us. I had been careful before, trying to remain unseen, but now there was no hiding from her or from myself. "I shouldn't," she murmured, letting the words hang in the air, fragile and dangerous. Her eyes searched mine, seeking permission, testing limits. And I wanted to give it, to give everything, even knowing the risk. Slowly, I reached up, hand trembling slightly, and brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. She didn't pull away. Her eyelids lowered just a fraction, and the faintest shiver ran through her. I let my hand linger for a heartbeat longer than necessary, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the warmth of her skin. "This changes everything," I whispered, my lips almost grazing hers, but not quite. The tension between us was unbearable, messy, raw, human. Desire tangled with fear, with hesitation, with the knowledge that what we were doing could never be fully spoken aloud. She leaned just a fraction closer, and for a long moment, we stayed suspended there, breath mingling, heartbeats sinking, aware that any step forward would be irreversible. "I don't care," she said finally, voice steady now, low and intimate. "I don't care who sees, or what happens. Not anymore." Something inside me surrendered, and I stepped closer, closing the last inches of space between us without breaking the fragile control. Her hand found mine at last, fingers intertwining, the simplest act holding all the weight of our connection. And in that moment, the world outside, the judgment, the interruptions, the risks, fell away. There was no need for words, no need for explanations. We understood each other fully. I could feel her pulse under my fingers, the warmth of her body pressed against mine, and the quiet electricity between us made it clear we were no longer separate. Everything had changed. Nothing would ever be the same. The office was quieter now, the hum of the lights softer somehow, less oppressive, almost companionable. We hadn't moved since that last heartbeat of confession and surrender. We just stood, or maybe leaned, against each other, close enough to feel the rise and fall of breaths, the warmth radiating from our bodies. Elena let out a soft sigh and rested her forehead against mine. I was so scared, she whispered, voice trembling but steadying as she spoke. Scared of what everyone would think, scared of losing control. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of her words, the truth behind them, the vulnerability she rarely allowed anyone to see. I was scared too, I admitted softly, my hand brushing hers. But being near you, it feels like the only place I want to be. Her fingers intertwined with mine, a gentle, unspoken promise that we didn't need to rush or justify our feelings. The age gap, the office whispers, all the reasons we had for hesitation, they felt distant, irrelevant in this quiet, suspended space. There was only the warmth of her hand in mine, the soft press of her shoulder against mine, and the sense that finally, we could just exist together without pretense. We leaned back slightly, sitting side by side on the edge of the desk, close enough that our legs brushed lightly. I could feel her heartbeat matching mine, and the simple contact was more intoxicating than anything I could have imagined. No words were needed. Her presence, her warmth, her quiet confidence softened the tension that had held us in limbo for weeks. "You're real?" I murmured, more to myself than to her. "And I don't want to lose that." She tilted her head, brushing her hair away from her face. "You won't," she whispered. Then, without another word, she leaned her head on my shoulder. I wrapped my arm around her, careful but not distant, letting her rest there, letting both of us breathe in the comfort and quiet intimacy we'd earned. The world outside still existed, still had its judgments and pressures, but in this moment, it didn't matter. We were close, imperfect, human, and somehow, that was enough. The silence between us was gentle, not tense, filled with the kind of warmth that comes from shared truths and long-held desire finally acknowledged. I pressed a soft kiss to her temple, a small gesture carrying more meaning than words ever could. She tilted her head slightly, almost imperceptibly, in response, and I felt the subtle shiver of connection run through her. For the first time in a long time, both of us were exactly where we wanted to be, together, unguarded, seen, and safe in each other's presence. And as we stayed like that, a quiet understanding settled over us. We didn't need to rush, we didn't need to overthink. There was only this, the warmth, the closeness, the slow burn of something real finally allowed to exist.